Mountain Man wanted to reject his broken bride. Then the winter changed everything. High above the world of roads and towns, where the air thinned and silence spoke louder than voices, lived Elias Crow. His cabin clung to the mountainside like a stubborn prayer that refused to fall away. Built of pine logs hand-cut and hauled by Elias himself, it stood firm against wind, snow, and time. Smoke rose from its chimney each morning, a thin gray line curling into heaven, as if the mountain itself were breathing. Elias liked it that way, quiet, unchanging. He rose before dawn, every day without fail. The sound of boots hitting the wooden floor echoed in the small cabin as he dressed by firelight. Outside, frost glazed the trees, turning branches into white bones reaching toward the sky. Winter had not yet arrived, but it lingered nearby, waiting. Elias split wood with the same precision he lived his life, clean strokes, no hesitation. Each strike of the axe landed true, echoing across the valley. He did not rush. He did not rest. He worked until his breath burned and his arms ached. Pain, he had learned, was easier than hope. Years ago he had prayed boldly. He had asked God for a future, for family, for love that would not leave him alone beneath the endless sky. But prayer after prayer had been answered with silence or loss. His mother had died first, kneeling beside her bed, lips moving in unfinished prayer. His brother followed a year later, crushed beneath a falling tree during a winter harvest. And then Sarah, the woman who had promised to marry him, had left the mountain for town and never returned. Rumors reached him eventually, but Elias never asked for details. Some truths cut deeper when named. After that, Elias stopped asking God why. He still believed, but his faith had grown hard like the frozen ground. It existed, but nothing bloomed from it. Every Sunday he read from the worn Bible his mother had left behind. Not out of joy but duty. He recited prayers without expecting answers. He lived righteously, yes, but at a distance. Loneliness had become familiar. Almost comforting. So when the letter arrived from Pastor Whitcomb, Elias stared at it for a long time before opening it. Elias, it read, "You have carried grief like a cross, but even Christ did not walk alone. The Lord said, 'It is not good for man to be alone.' I urge you, send for a wife. Trust God again." Elias scoffed softly. Trust again. Yet that night, kneeling beside his bed, Elias surprised himself. "If you still see me," he murmured, "then send someone strong enough to survive this place." He did not pray for love. He prayed for endurance. Weeks passed. Autumn deepened. The mountain dressed itself in gold and rust, then shed its colors in preparation for the cold. Elias prepared the cabin with practiced efficiency, stacking wood high, sealing gaps, salting meat. And then, on a gray morning heavy with the promise of snow, he heard it. The sound of a stagecoach bell. Elias stepped outside, his breath fogging the air. The road below twisted through the trees like a scar. The coach slowed, horses snorting, steam rising from their backs. This was it. He told himself not to expect much, only competence. Only survival. The door opened. A woman stepped down. She was smaller than he imagined. Wrapped in a worn coat, her posture careful, her movements measured. One foot touched the ground uncertainly, her weight shifting as though pain lived in her bones. Her face was pale but composed, eyes lowered against the wind. Elias felt something inside him tighten, not with hope but dread. This was not the woman he had prayed for. She carried a single valise and a Bible held close to her chest, as if it were the only thing steady in her world. The driver glanced at Elias with something like pity before climbing back onto his seat. The woman looked up then, her eyes meeting Elias's for the first time. There was fear there. And faith. "I'm Miriam Hale," she said softly. I believe you sent for me." Elias said nothing. The wind stirred, carrying the scent of snow. In that moment, as the stagecoach turned and vanished down the mountain road, Elias knew one thing with terrible certainty. This winter would test him in ways no mountain ever had. And he wondered, just briefly, whether God had sent not the woman he wanted, but the one he needed. The cabin door closed behind them with a dull, final sound. It was not a loud noise, yet to Miriam Hale, it felt like a verdict. Warmth from the hearth wrapped the small room, but she did not relax. She stood near the door, valise in one hand, Bible in the other, uncertain where to place either. The cabin smelled of pine resin and smoke, of a life lived alone. Everything had a place, nothing waited for her. Elias Crow removed his coat and hung it on a peg. He did not offer to take hers. "Set your things there," he said at last, nodding toward a corner near the stairs to the loft. Miriam obeyed. Each step was careful. Her limp was more visible in the confined space and she felt Elias notice it, though he pretended not to. She folded her coat neatly and placed her valise beside it. Her Bible she kept in her arms, fingers tight around the leather cover. They sat at the table in silence while Elias ladled stew into 2 bowls. He ate quickly, efficiently. Miriam waited until he nodded before touching her spoon. The quiet stretched. Finally Elias spoke, his voice low but edged. "You didn't say you were hurt." Miriam's spoon paused halfway to her mouth. "I did not know how," she replied gently. He looked at her then, really looked, and his jaw tightened. The way she held her arm close to her side. The stiffness in her leg. The faint tremor she tried to hide. What happened? Her breath caught. She had prayed she would not have to answer that question, not tonight. "I was pushed," she said, "down a mill stair. By a man who promised marriage." The words fell softly but they landed heavy. "I survived," she added quickly. "I can still work. I am careful. I learn ways around what I cannot do." Elias leaned back in his chair. "This place is not gentle," he said. "Winter up here kills the weak." Miriam lowered her eyes, her appetite gone. "I know." Silence returned, thicker now. When Elias finally spoke again, his voice was colder. "I sent for a wife," he said. "Someone able to carry her weight." Miriam swallowed hard. "I am not asking to be carried," she whispered. He hesitated, just a moment, but then said the word that would stay with her long after the fire died down. "You're broken." The word sliced through the air. Miriam closed her eyes. Broken. She had been called many things since the fall, damaged, ruined, useless. She had prayed those names would not follow her here, up the mountain, so close to God's sky. Yet here it was again. She stood slowly, pain flashing through her leg. "If you wish me to leave," she said, her voice trembling but steady, "I will. I won't curse you for it." Elias looked away. "The roads will close soon," he muttered. "You won't make it far." "I will trust God," she said simply. That night, Elias pointed toward the ladder leading to the loft. "You can sleep up there." He did not say welcome. He did not say stay. Later, as Elias lay awake listening to the wind scrape against the cabin walls, he heard a soft sound from above. Prayer. Miriam's voice, barely more than a whisper. "Lord, you see me. You know my weakness. If I am unwanted, still let me be faithful. If I am a burden, teach me to serve quietly. I place my life in your hands." Elias turned his face toward the wall. He told himself he felt nothing. But something deep within him shifted, uneasy, unquiet, as the first snow of the season brushed against the window like a warning. And somewhere between the crackle of the fire and the falling snow, God was already at work, undoing the meaning of the word broken. Winter did not arrive politely. It came on a breath of iron wind that swept down the ridges without warning, bending the trees until they groaned like living things. By dawn, the mountain was unrecognizable, paths erased, stones buried, the world transformed into white silence. Elias Crow stood on the porch, eyes narrowed against the sting of snow. He had seen many winters, but something about this one felt personal. The kind that tested a man's resolve, not just his strength. Behind him, the cabin door creaked open. Miriam stepped out, wrapped in her coat, hair braided tightly against the cold. She moved slowly, careful of her footing, but her gaze was steady. "The storm came early," she said. Elias nodded once. "We're cut off now." He expected fear. He expected questions. Instead, she said, "Then we'll need prayer as much as firewood." That annoyed him, more than it should have. Elias spent the day hauling timber from the far stack, pushing his body harder than necessary. Snow soaked through his gloves. The axe bit deep into frozen wood. Each swing was fueled by frustration, at the storm, at God, at the woman inside his cabin who should not be there. By evening, his hands shook from exhaustion, but he kept working. Inside, Miriam prepared what food she could, stretching supplies with quiet care. She did not complain when her arm throbbed or when standing too long made her leg burn. She hummed hymns under her breath as she worked, songs Elias remembered from childhood. When night fell, Elias's fever rose with it. He collapsed onto the bench by the hearth, breath ragged, skin burning. The world tilted, shadows swimming along the walls. Miriam noticed immediately. "You're ill," she said, kneeling beside him. "I'm fine," he rasped. But he wasn't. By midnight he was shaking violently, teeth chattering despite the fire. Miriam soaked a cloth in cool water and pressed it gently to his forehead. Her hands were warm, steady. She stayed awake all night. As Elias drifted in and out of consciousness, he heard her voice, soft, faithful. He who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will abide in the shadow of the Almighty. Scripture he hadn't heard spoken aloud in years. When morning came, Elias woke to the smell of broth and the sound of snow sliding off the roof. His head throbbed. His body felt weak, humbling. Miriam sat nearby, eyes red with exhaustion. "You should have let me help yesterday," she said quietly. He had no answer. The storm raged for 3 days. Elias remained confined to the cabin, frustrated by his weakness. Miriam rationed food, fed the fire, and read from the Bible when the wind howled loud enough to shake the walls. One night, as the storm reached its fiercest, Elias asked a question he had not intended to voice. "Why did you come here?" he muttered. She looked at him, surprised. "I prayed for a place God could still use me," she said. "I thought, perhaps this mountain." Elias stared into the flames. "You're not afraid?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "I am. But faith isn't the absence of fear. It's choosing to trust anyway." That night, Elias stood at the window watching snow swirl like ash. For the first time in years, he whispered a prayer, not of demand but of uncertainty. "Lord, what are you doing?" The wind did not answer. But the storm in its own way had begun to soften stone. After the storm passed, the mountain settled into a deeper silence. Snow lay heavy on the world, thick and unbroken, as though God himself had laid a hand over the land and said, "Be still." The sky remained pale for days, the sun little more than a distant promise. Paths stayed buried. Time seemed to move differently, measured not by hours but by breath, prayer, and the steady crackle of the hearth. Elias Crow healed slowly. His fever broke, but weakness lingered in his limbs like an unwelcome guest. Each morning he tested his strength, splitting a log, carrying water, then returned inside sooner than he wished, frustration etched deep across his face. Miriam noticed everything. She did not hover. She did not lecture. She simply adjusted, placing tools closer, preparing meals that strengthened without draining their supplies, reminding him gently to rest without ever using the word. Each dawn, before Elias rose, Miriam knelt by the hearth with her Bible open. The firelight caught the thin pages as her lips moved silently, her fingers resting on verses worn smooth by use. Elias watched from the loft one morning, unseen. She prayed for him by name. "Give him strength, Lord, of body and of heart. Heal what winter and sorrow have frozen." The words unsettled him more than the storm ever had. Later that day, Elias found her mending his coat. Her injured arm worked slowly, painfully, yet her stitches were careful, precise. "You don't have to do that," he said gruffly. She looked up. "I want to." There was no bitterness in her voice. No reminder of his earlier cruelty. Only willingness. That night the wolves came. Their howls echoed across the ridge, long and mournful, sending a shiver through the cabin walls. Elias reached for his rifle, instincts sharp despite his weakness. Miriam stood beside him, lifting the lamp high. "They smell the winter," she said. "And hunger." Elias expected her to step back. She did not. When the howling finally faded, he realized something unsettling. Her fear had not ruled her. "What makes you so steady?" he asked quietly. She hesitated, then answered. "I've already survived what I thought would kill me," she said. "Everything else feels smaller." Her honesty struck him deeper than he expected. Days passed. Snow became routine. Silence became companionable. One evening, as Miriam read aloud from the Gospel of John, Elias interrupted. "Why that passage?" he asked. She smiled. "It reminds me that Jesus came to dwell among us, not above us. He chose weakness." Elias swallowed hard. For years he had equated strength with solitude, endurance with silence. Yet here was a woman the world had discarded, radiating something he had lost. Faith. That night, Elias knelt beside his bed for the first time since his brother's death. He did not speak eloquently. He did not know what to ask for. He only said, "I don't understand your ways, but I see you working." Outside, snow continued to fall. Inside, stone began to crack. And for the first time, Elias wondered if God's greatest strength was not found in the axe or the rifle, but in the quiet perseverance of a wounded heart that refused to stop loving. The mountain groaned beneath the weight of the storm. Snow fell not in flakes but in sheets, driven sideways by a wind that screamed through the pines like a living thing. The sky darkened before noon, swallowing the light until day and night became indistinguishable. It was the kind of storm old men spoke of in hushed voices, the kind that buried cabins and broke spirits. Elias Crow felt it in his bones. "We need to clear the roof," he said, tightening his coat. If it caves, we won't survive. Miriam looked at him, fear flickering across her face, but she nodded. Be careful, she said. Please. He did not answer. The ladder was slick with ice. Snow burned Elias's eyes as he climbed, each rung harder than the last. He moved quickly, pushing his body beyond its limits, shoveling heavy drifts from the roof as the wind fought him. Then his boot slipped. The world spun. His body twisted midair and he crashed into the snow below with a sickening crack. Pain exploded through his leg. His scream tore through the storm. Miriam heard it. She rushed outside, the wind nearly knocking her back. When she saw him, crumpled, motionless, terror seized her heart. Elias, she cried. Ignoring the agony in her own body, she fought through the snow, falling once, then again. She reached him, kneeling beside him, hands shaking as she checked for life. He was conscious but barely. My leg, he gasped. I can't move it. The storm raged on, merciless. Miriam did not think, she acted. She wrapped her arms beneath his shoulders and dragged him inch by inch toward the cabin. Every pull sent lightning through her injured arm and leg, but she did not stop. She prayed aloud between sobs. Lord, give me strength that is not my own. When she finally pulled him inside, she collapsed beside him, breathless, trembling. There was no time to rest. She bound his leg as best she could, using torn cloth and prayer. She stoked the fire, choking back smoke as snow clogged the chimney. She rationed food, melting snow for water, speaking scripture into the darkness. Elias drifted in and out of consciousness, his pride breaking with his body. In his delirium, he heard Miriam praying. Not begging. Trusting. If he lives, I will praise you, she whispered. If he dies, I will still trust you. The words shattered something in him. For 3 days and nights the storm trapped them. Miriam did not sleep. She ate little. Her body screamed for rest, but she answered it with faith. On the third night, Elias woke fully. Miriam sat slumped beside the hearth, eyes closed, Bible open in her lap. Miriam, he whispered. She stirred. I'm here. Tears streamed down his face. I called you broken, he said hoarsely. But you carried me when I was helpless. She took his hand, squeezing gently. God carried us both, she said. Outside, the wind finally softened. Inside, a mountain man's heart surrendered to grace. And in the longest night of winter, God rewrote the meaning of strength forever. Spring did not arrive all at once. It came the way healing often does, quietly, almost unnoticed at first. A drip of water from the eaves. A thinning of ice along the stream. The faint green of moss peeking through the snow as if the earth itself were daring to hope again. Inside the cabin, Elias Crow learned patience. His leg healed slowly, bound in splints Miriam had fashioned from spare wood and cloth. Each morning he tested his weight against the floor, jaw clenched as pain flared. Pride made him want to rush. Wisdom, hard-won and humbling, told him to wait. Miriam watched him closely. Strength grows best when it's not forced, she said one morning as she helped him settle by the hearth. Elias almost smiled. Almost. The days lengthened. Light lingered longer on the walls. The wolves stopped howling at night. And though snow still covered much of the mountain, something had shifted, inside both of them. Elias began reading scripture again, not out of duty but hunger. They read together in the evenings, Miriam's voice steady as she traced promises Elias had forgotten. A bruised reed he will not break, she read one night. And a smoldering wick he will not snuff out. Elias swallowed hard. I was both, he admitted quietly. She nodded. So was I. As his legs strengthened, Elias insisted on helping, small tasks at first. Sharpening tools. Sorting seed packets. Planning repairs. Miriam did not stop him, but she matched his pace. Together, they cleared the doorway when the snow receded enough to allow it. Together, they laughed when Elias slipped and landed in a drift, safe, embarrassed, alive. One afternoon, as they sat on the porch wrapped in blankets, Elias spoke of his past without anger for the first time. My mother used to pray aloud, he said. Said silence scared her. Miriam smiled. Mine too. He told her about his brother. About Sarah. About how he stopped asking God questions because he feared the answers. I thought faith meant not needing anyone, he confessed. Miriam looked at the valley below. Faith means knowing who to lean on, she said. And letting others do the same. When Elias finally walked without a cane, spring had taken hold in earnest. The snow retreated to the shadows. Streams swelled with meltwater. Birds returned in bursts of song that startled the quiet. Elias suggested planting a garden. We'll start small, he said. Miriam's face lit up. They worked side by side in the thawed earth. Elias dug furrows. Miriam planted seeds with care, whispering prayers over each row. "What are you asking God for?" Elias asked. "That something good will grow where winter once ruled," she replied. The words lingered. On Easter morning, Elias rose before dawn, not out of habit but anticipation. He dressed carefully, then helped Miriam into her coat. "Come with me," he said. They climbed slowly to the ridge overlooking the valley. The sun crested the horizon, spilling gold across the mountains like a benediction. Elias removed his hat. "I asked God for strength," he said, voice thick. "I thought it meant muscle and endurance. But he gave me mercy. And faith. And you." Miriam's breath caught. Kneeling in the softened earth, Elias took her hand. "I was wrong about you," he said. "And about myself. Will you forgive me, and stay not because you must, but because you choose to?" Tears streamed down Miriam's face. "I already chose," she whispered. "The day I prayed for you when you called me broken." They prayed together as the sun rose, two wounded souls bound by grace. Spring deepened. The cabin filled with light and laughter. Elias carved small toys for the children they hoped to have someday. Miriam taught him hymns he half remembered. And each night, before sleep, Elias thanked God, not for strength alone, but for a winter that changed everything. The mountains never stopped remembering winter. Even in high summer, pockets of snow lingered in shaded crevices, tucked away like old sorrows that refused to fully melt. Elias and Miriam Crow understood this better than most. They had learned that healing did not erase scars, it taught them how to live with them. The cabin changed over the years. What was once a place of solitude became a place of welcome. The door was rarely shut. Smoke from the chimney no longer signaled isolation but hospitality. Travelers learned they could knock without fear and find a warm meal, a listening ear and prayer offered freely. Elias no longer rose in silence. Each morning, he prayed aloud with Miriam, thanking God for breath, for provision, for mercy that had carried them through the longest night. He still split wood and worked the land, but his strength now had gentleness in it. Miriam kept the cabin filled with scripture. Verses were written on scraps of paper and tucked into corners of the home. Psalms were memorized and spoken when storms rolled in. The Bible she had carried up the mountain grew more worn, its pages softened by years of faithful use. Children came. Not at first, and not easily, but in time. They learned to walk on uneven ground, to respect the mountain, to listen when the wind changed. Elias taught them how to hunt and build. Miriam taught them how to pray, how to forgive, how to trust God when answers did not come quickly. When neighbors asked how such joy had found its way to such a harsh place, Elias would smile, a quiet, knowing smile. "Winter taught us," he would say. On long evenings by the fire, Elias told their story, not with bitterness but humility. "I thought strength meant standing alone," he would say. "But God showed me that true strength is letting yourself be loved." Miriam would add softly, "and letting yourself love back even when you've been hurt." The mountain bore witness to their faith. Storms still came. Loss still visited. There were years of lean harvest and nights of aching memories. But Elias and Miriam no longer faced hardship as enemies to faith, they welcomed them as teachers. One winter many years later, Elias fell ill again. This time it was Miriam who sat beside him, her hair silver now, her hands still steady. The fire burned low and snow pressed gently against the windows. "Do you remember," Elias whispered, "what I called you when you first came?" Miriam smiled sadly. "I do. I was wrong," he said. "But God wasn't." She leaned close. "He never is." When Elias passed into rest, the mountain seemed to hold its breath. Miriam buried him beneath a pine overlooking the valley, scripture spoken through tears. She lived on, teaching, praying, welcoming, until her own winter came gently. And when she was laid beside him, those who gathered spoke of a legacy that could not be measured in land or wealth. They spoke of faith. They spoke of grace. They spoke of a winter that revealed the heart of God. And the mountain, steadfast and silent, stood as a testament to a simple, eternal truth. What the world calls broken, God calls chosen.